Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode If You Could Hide to Kolob podcast. My name's Daniel. This is my brother Clive.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Daniel. We've got a lot of war happening in this few episodes, so I thought my quote could sort of marry up with that. And I got a quote from David O. McKay about war.
Great, go for it.
Okay. So back in the April conference 1942, he said there are two conditions which men may justify a truly Christian man to enter. Mind you, I say enter and not start a war. Number one, an attempt by others to dominate and to deprive another of his freedom. Number two, loyalty to his country. Possibly a third, vis-a-vis defense of a weak nation that is being unjustly crushed by a strong, ruthless one. And I thought I'd bring that up because, the question sort of I was asking was, what's the purpose of the wars? The Anti-Nephi Lehi's, they throw down their weapons and refuse to go to war. So who's right? The Nephites that go to war, the Anti-Nephi Lehi's that don't go to war. That's sort of the vein I was thinking of when I was thinking of that quote.
And that's what we're going to be looking at today. And I think it's interesting because a very basic, incorrect summary of the Book of Mormon is, it's just full of wars. There's just so many wars. Why is there so many wars? But in reality, there's not. Like, we're going to get into more wars now, but we're well over halfway through. And the first half, to me, okay, there's been some fightings, but not much. It's been disruption. It's been doctrine. It's been lots of teaching about Christ. There's not really been all that many wars. And I think sometimes the Book of Mormon gets a bad rap, that it's just a book full of wars, when in reality, when you actually start studying it, they're really on the fringes. This lesson that we've got, these are the war, I guess they're summarized as the war chapters. There's really just two separate stories in them. And we're really going to cover today in part 1, chapter 43, 44, 45, and 46. And then we'll come back for a part 2. So there's a couple of places to be aware of that we've talked about in previous episodes, a couple of towns. And one of the towns we're going to talk about is Jershon. And just to give a bit of a throwback summary, Jershon is the place where the anti-Nephi Lehi, the people who are now called the people of Ammon, that's where they settled. So these are a bunch of people who were Lamanites. They were converted to the gospel in a heroic, amazing missionary experiences, and they go and settle in Jershon. And then there's another town, which we'll talk about as well today, and I'm just bringing up my map here. Another place called Antionum, and we'll talk about that as well today. But Jershon and Antionum, I guess if you're thinking about, Zarahemla is in the middle, and Jershon is kind of northeast, whereas Antionum is northeast of Zarahemla in the middle. That's an all right summary, isn't it, Clive?
Yeah, I think, I understand it because I've seen your map many times.
Yeah, and so head to our Facebook page. We do have a picture of the map that I've mentioned a bunch of times by John L. Sorensen, and that helps get your bearings. But in no way is that map gospel. The map is not pretending to be a place. It's not specifically that, it's this place in America. What the map is it's just in the scriptures, in the Book of Mormon, it tells us this place was this far from this place. This place had a river in it. This place was 3 days' walk. This place was near the wilderness. And so this map is created from these descriptions of the Book of Mormon. So have a look at that, and you can kind of get your bearings of where Jershon is in relation to Zarahemla. So there's two verses here that we just get out of the way, and that's verse 1 and 2. So we're on chapter 43. And now it came to pass that the sons of Alma did go forth among the people to declare the word unto them, and Alma also himself could not rest, and he also went forth. So you remember in last week's Come Follow Me, it was Corianton. The week before was Shiblon and Helaman. So now those conversations with Alma's sons are over. Verse 2, now we shall say no more concerning their preaching, except that they preached the word and the truth according to the spirit of prophecy and revelation, and they preached after the holy order of God by which they were called. So they teach after the holy order, and they teach with the priesthood, and they teach about the atonement. So now we get this, it's almost like a sidebar that Alma was talking to his sons, because now it brings us back to the present day. And the present day is chapter 30 and 31. So it says here in verse 3, and now I return to an account of the wars between the Nephites and the Lamanites in the 18th year of the reign of the judges. So you've got to go back to chapter 30 and 31, which I did, Clive, and it tells us clearly. So we have the story of Korihor and the story of the Zoramites, and these things happen in that 18th year. So now we're back at verse 43, chapter 43, and we're going back in time to the 18th chapter. We really haven't moved from the 18th year, but that's kind of where it picks up the pieces, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's funny though. Like you read verse 1, and Alma's sons went out and preached, and it's almost like Alma's an old man that doesn't know how to retire, because it says, and Alma also himself could not rest, and he also went forth. Like, I've got a job to do, I've got to go out, but he's this old man now, and he's just, no, to him, this isn't rest, it's go out and go and continue to preach. But yeah, I just imagine him an old man that doesn't know how to retire and wants to continue on with the work. And it's really, really short, but I think it's really fascinating, that part.
Yeah, I agree. It is unreal. And obviously Alma just has a thirst for teaching people and sharing the gospel. I almost feel like he's always trying to make up for his misdeeds before his Christ life.
Yeah.
Especially the way he brought it up with Helaman and the way he talked about it with Helaman. You almost think that's always weighing down on him, what his actions were like. Okay. So now we introduce who the war is between more specifically, because it tells us about the war between the Nephites and the Lamanites. But here in verse 4, for behold, it came to pass that the Zoramites became Lamanites. Therefore, in the commencement of the 18th year, the people of the Nephites saw that the Lamanites were coming upon them. Therefore, they made preparations for war. Yea, they gathered together their armies in the land of Jershon. So we're talking about Jershon already. And the Zoramites have joined with the Lamanites. And that's an important point to recall and just to remember as we're going through this verse 5. And it came to pass that the Lamanites came with their thousands, and they came into the land of Antionum. So remember, I talked about that before. We got Jershon and Antionum, which is the land of the Zoramites. And a man by the name of Zarahemnah was their leader. So now we're introducing another person into this story. So we've got the Zoramites who have joined forces with the Lamanites, and the head of the Zoramites is Zarahemnah, and they all live in Antionum, which is kind of the next major town down from where Jershon is. And now, as the Amalekites were of a more wicked and murderous disposition than the Lamanites were, in and of themselves, therefore, Zarahemnah appointed chief captains over the Lamanites, and they were all Amalekites and Zoramites. And then verse 7, I don't want to read all of it, but there is just a little bit to make sure we get out. Now this he did that he might preserve their hatred towards the Nephites, that he might bring them into subjection to the accomplishment of his designs. So some things here to consider. Who are the Nephites? Who are they fighting? Well, they're going to fight the Lamanites, but the scriptures clearly tell us that the Lamanites weren't actually all that mad. It's really the Zoramites and the Amalekites that hate the Nephites. And Zarahemnah, being so clever, puts these two groups of people in charge of the Lamanites. So the leaders of the Lamanites are the ones that hate the Nephites. Lamanites don't hate the Nephites that much themselves, right?
Yeah, well, it is interesting the way he did it, because he sort of wanted this war to continue. Like, it's not going to be, okay, the Lamanites have given up because they really don't care. It's, I want this war to continue, so I'm going to find the people who hate the most. Like, if you want to go after a group of people, you would find someone who used to be part of those people. Like, if someone were to go to war against the members of the church, you'd find someone who used to be a member of the church to be the leader.
Yeah.
And to be, the chiefs over everyone else, because they know the strategies, they have the hatred, and they're going to do anything they can to stop it.
And the people who weren't members of the church don't care all that much. They just kicking back themselves, and they're not really that super interested. Like, okay, they might hate religion or organized religion, but in reality, it doesn't bother them too much.
Yeah, I think it's like, yes, we want to go to war with these people because we really don't like them. We think, Latter-day Saints are brainwashed and we really don't like them. But then when it came to, oh, they're more powerful than we are, you know what, we're just going to quit and go home. So Zarahemna, he didn't want that. He wanted people who don't quit, who keep fighting.
Who hate them.
Later on, we'll talk about that they get to a point where they go, you're going to die if you don't quit now. And Zarahemna just didn't want to give up because that was his whole idea.
So we got in verse 8, for behold, his designs were to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites, that this he did that he might usurp great power over them, and also that he might gain power over the Nephites by bringing them to bondage. And so he says, great, let's grab. So Zarahemna goes, great, we'll grab the Zoramites, grab the Amalekites. They hate the Nephites so much that they'll stir up the Lamanites to hate them, because in the end, I actually just want them to all be my slaves, and I want free labor, and I want them to build up my cities themselves. And while they're there, I'm going to force them that they can't practice their religion anymore because I hate them so much. Where the Lamanites clearly here aren't, they're not the ones that start this war. They're kind of impartial. But, the Zoramites and the Amalekites call on their love for war, call on their bloodlust, and stir them up and get them all angry about how much they hate the Nephites to convince them that this is a good thing, that they should try to wipe them out or at least bring them to bondage.
You know what I was curious about? Because in a minute, they'll go on to say, on the other hand, there's this new guy named Moroni for the Nephites. Does Mormon have the writings of the Lamanites to know this is what's happened? Like, how does, like the Nephites are the ones with the plates, the Nephites are the ones with the writings. Did the Zoramites or Amalekites have some kind of writing that they went, okay, now we're going to do this and this is going to be our strategy? Or is it just something that was discovered later? Okay, they did this. How do you think?
I'm not sure. I would think that maybe in their writings, maybe in Zarahemna's writing, or in perhaps Zarahemna's writing, that he made reference to that the key to winning is by using the Lamanite army, and the key to winning is to make them angry. So
you think Zarahemna had writings and he wrote them down and Mormon got his hands on them?
I would think so. Like, I would think so. I mean, they're a advanced civilization for their time. They've got temples, they've got good buildings, they've got good communication. So they must have writings, and they must have, they would have had a way to deliver the messages from Zarahemla out to all of the towns. They must have. So lots of people must have known how to read, how to write, and people would have been delivering information. I guess that's my interpretation of it, at least. That Mormon has got all these writings, so he knows to add in there that the Zarahemna went out of his way to make sure that the Lamanites were unhappy.
Yeah,
where previously they weren't.
Yeah,
but it's a good thought. I mean, we do know, right, that there was lots and lots of records,
Yeah, many records.
Yeah. So many that some had to be pointed out to him, right?
Yeah.
Is that the case with the Jaredites? I can't remember exactly what we talked about, but the story was, I wish I could remember where it is. Maybe early in Mosiah, where it's like, and they pointed out the text inserted into the text is, I'm going to put this story in because I found this story and I'm going to insert it into the text here.
Well, you remember when Joseph Smith went to the Hill Cumorah and he said there was writings everywhere, all over the walls, not on the walls, but in parchments on the walls.
Yeah.
So, and then there's even more writings found later on. So, yeah, all right. So, moving on then. So then we get to the Nephite side, and they bring up this new guy who Mormon absolutely loves, named Moroni, a 25-year-old, quite young for his time, and he's put in charge of the Nephite army. And Moroni is smart. He's a really smart guy. Reading all of his strategies and the things that he's doing. He's really clever with the way that he sorts stuff out. But I guess we'll get into that in a minute. But he sets up the army in a way that has never been done before, with swords and
Armor,
what do you say?
scimitars.
Scimitars.
Yeah.
Scimitars. Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
gonna say scimitars. But yeah, you're
Scimitars.
right. It's with breastplates and with armor, and so
Helmets.
Yep. So
Shields.
Moroni really goes out of his way, and he really thinks about the protection of his people. Whereas the Lamanites, they're just pawns on a chessboard. They're just going out, and if they get wiped out, it doesn't really matter because there's 200 more behind. Where you feel like Moroni genuinely cares for his army, and he doesn't want to just send them out to slaughter. He has a really good think about how can they survive this battle? How can they go home? Because we read in verse 9 and verse 10, I think it's the Nephites are doing this because of their families and because the love they have for their families. So Moroni wants to make sure they all go home, whereas Zarahemna doesn't care. He just wants to see if he can just overrun them by force.
The Lamanites have a bigger army, and it doesn't say Moroni made a few shields, a few helmets, and those that he didn't make them for sort of stayed at the back. You're right. They did it for their families. The Lamanites did it because they hated the Nephites. The Nephites did it to protect their families. And so that was their whole purpose. Protect the families, come home to your family. So he wanted to make sure that everyone stayed in. And I guess it sort of worked at first. As soon as the Lamanites saw the Nephite army, they went, oh no, like these guys are fully prepared. The Lamanites were naked except, loincloth.
Well, it says in verse 20, now the army of Zarahemna was not prepared with any such thing. They had only their swords and their scimitars, their bows and their arrows, their stones and their slings, and they were naked, save it were a skin which was girded about their loins. Yea, all were naked, save it were the Zoramites and the Amalekites. So again, the Zoramites and the Amalekites, they've learned from the Nephites. And so they're a slightly bit more prepared, but for the Lamanites, who's actually supplying the muscle in this army, Zarahemna is just treating them like pawns, just throwing them at the Nephites, and if they get killed, he really doesn't worry about it. And I like a couple of different things here. You were talking about the strategy. This is where Moroni inquires with Alma, right? So I'll just read a couple of things here, verse 22, and I'll read verse 23 as well. Behold, now it came to pass that they durst not come against the Nephites in the borders of Jershon. Therefore they departed out of the land of Antionum into the wilderness, and took their journey round about into the wilderness, save it by the head of the river Sidon, that they might come into the land of Manti. Again, refer to that map to give you a little bit of a understanding of where all these places are. And they took possession of the land, and they did not suppose that the armies of Moroni would know whether they had gone. So they go to Manti and take it over, which is something we don't want to miss. Like the Manti is just a bunch of people doing their own thing, and now all of a sudden it's been taken over. It's been ran over by this army. And so now this is where Moroni has a strategy. But it came to pass, this is verse 23, as soon as they had departed into the wilderness, so this is the Zarahemna's crew, Moroni sent spies into the wilderness to watch their camp, and Moroni also, knowing of the prophecies of Alma, sent certain men unto him, desiring him that he should inquire with the Lord whether the armies of the Nephites should go to defend themselves against the Lamanites. So Moroni's left with a choice. The spies come back and they say they're out here in the wilderness, they're kicking back, they've gone to Manti, they've taken it over, and they're just kind of marching around. They're going from place to place, sleeping, whatever it is that these spies report back, to the point where Moroni goes, right, well, what should we do? Who can help? And he knows that the Lord can help. So I wonder who he called on. Did he call on teachers or priests, or did he call on the high priest of the land to say, hey, go talk to Alma? Because I don't know who could have just waltzed up to Alma and said, hey, can you check this out with God?
But my question is, why didn't Moroni inquire of the Lord himself? I know that Alma's the prophet, or, in charge as well, but all through the scriptures, inquire of the Lord. It's almost like Moroni's been assigned to, okay, you're now the elders quorum president, and the elders quorum president doesn't go, all right, Bishop, can you pray about this for me? So I'm just curious why Moroni asked Alma
Well, I don't
if he
think the
would pray for
text.
him.
I don't think the text is telling us that Moroni is a special spiritual leader at this stage. I don't.
Right.
I don't
Okay.
know if the text is telling us that. The text is telling us is that he's a young, abled man, and he was able to take command of an army. I don't know if the text says he's super spiritual. He respects God, I'm sure, but at this stage he's not. Well, the text is not telling us, at least, that he's a hyper spiritual person. I guess maybe we just make that up.
So I guess more in context, I guess he's a deacon, and he's going to the bishop and saying, "What should I do about this?" And the bishop goes and prays about it.
Yeah. He's going
Right.
to Alma, going, I know you know. Can you check this out for us, because I need a bit of help here.
Yeah.
And it came to, so this 24, and it came to pass that the word of the Lord came unto Alma, and Alma informed the messengers of Moroni that the armies of the Lamanites were marching round about in the wilderness, that they might come over into the land of Mentai, that they might commence an attack upon the weaker part of the people. And those messengers went and delivered the message unto Moroni. So then Moroni now starts this stratagem that you were talking about before. He leaves a part of his army in Jershon, and then he takes a part out. So we got 25, 26, 27, and it tells us all the different things that he's going to do. So he leaving a part of his army in the land of Jershon, just in case they come back. And then he says in 26, he calls that all the people in the quarter of the land should gather themselves together to battle against the Lamanites. So he brings people up, and we start to see a bit of this term liberty that starts to get thrown around a little bit. This is the first time I think we hear about it here. So he says they should gather themselves together to battle against the Lamanites, to defend their lands and their country, their rights and their liberties. Therefore, they were prepared against the time of the coming of the Lamanites. And then verse 27, a part of his army should be secreted in the valley, which was near the bank of the river Sidon. So this is another part of it. And then Moroni places more spies around about the camp. And then he goes into, and now as this is 29, now as Moroni knew the intention of the Lamanites, that it was their intention to destroy their brethren, or to subject them and bring them into bondage, that they might establish a kingdom unto themselves over all the land. So this is his reason. This is his purpose. His purpose is to not be overtaken and not to be led into bondage.
But then there's an interesting verse that I was surprised that it was put in here. And I'll read it. It's verse 30. And he also, knowing that it was the only desire of the Nephites to preserve their lands and their liberty and their church. So that's the purpose of them going to war. Not to kill the Lamanites, but to protect themselves. Therefore, he thought it no sin that he should defend them by stratagem. Therefore, he found by his spies, which caused the Lamanites were to take. So there's a reason why he's going to battle, to protect them. And he found out from the spies what course the Lamanites were going to take. And so he says there, I find it no sin to go by this strategy. It's just an interesting thing. Like, it's an interesting thing to throw in there. Like, I know it's okay to do this. I did it. I was secretly got this information, but I know it's okay to do it. Don't you think that's just an odd verse to throw in?
He feels he's cheated the unwritten rules of war?
Like he's trying to explain to someone who is saying, well, that doesn't seem like the right way to go. So before anyone can say he's gone, I feel like this is actually okay. Even though I've done it secretly and by spies, I actually feel like this is okay to do. No one's questioning it. He just says it.
You're right. Yeah, I wonder if maybe back then the idea was that you're just men, and just men run up to each other and just fight.
Yeah.
And now he's taking this really clever approach. He's been helped by the Lord, of course, but he's taken this really clever approach, where maybe back then it was like, no, men don't worry about that. Men just run up to each other and just stab each other, and whoever's standing is the biggest man.
That's true. I mean, yeah, that is a good thing, because I can't remember another time where they've used strategy like this. So it is very obscure, I guess. You know, I think this is okay, because this is actually a new way of looking at things.
Maybe that's why Moroni plays a big part in it. Like we talked about, the text doesn't say that he's super spiritual, but he's obviously young enough to be super humble and to look at doing things different ways, different to maybe what they've always been done. Maybe that's a whole part of why Moroni was chosen, because he is creative. He's not just set in, oh, this is just what we have to do for the sake of it. Well, that's all part and parcel of Moroni being the man he was.
Yeah. So should we go through the strategy of how it all happened?
Yeah, let's go.
So I guess the first thing, the Lamanites fought Lehi's army near the River Sidon. So they got to near the River Sidon. There's an army there, and that's being led by a guy named Lehi. And they fought there for a while, but a lot died, and so then they fled to the other side of the River Sidon.
Yeah, and don't forget, this is where Moroni's had all these people placed. He says he conceals them, so he's got a whole bunch of people placed. So wherever the Lamanites can run, bang, he's got another army there that's just waiting for them to fall into this trap, I guess.
The River Sidon, that's a big river that runs all the way through, right? From east to west?
From north to south.
North to south, yeah.
Yeah, north, runs right through Zarahemla, all the way down. Okay, and I like this here about the work of death. So this is in 37, and the work of death commenced on both sides. I just thought that language was really interesting. But it was more dreadful on the part of the Lamanites, for their nakedness was exposed to the heavy blows of the Nephites with their swords and their scimitars, which brought death almost at every stroke. And that's what we were talking about before. Zarahemna he's just happy to just throw 1,000,000 Lamanites at it. And if 900 get killed, but 100 make it, then happy days. Yeah. It's all good, whatever it is in the end. Now in verse 38, while on the other hand, there was now and then a man fell among the Nephites by the swords and the loss of blood, they being shielded from the more vital parts of their body, or the more vital parts of the body being shielded from the strokes of the Lamanites by their breastplates and their arm shields and their head plates. And thus the Nephites did carry on the work of death among the Lamanites. Just that language. You know what I found interesting? I think I counted 4 times the point is made of the Lamanites' nakedness, or 3 times in the one chapter, the nakedness on one side and the armor on the other, which I thought was really interesting as well. Like it's a long chapter, chapter 60, the 54 verses. Not that Mormon cared about chapters, but like mention it 3 times, just mention it once, we got it.
Yeah, I guess you just want to drive the point home.
Yeah.
Look what we've got compared to look what they've got. After all these, hundreds of years, they're still very basic people.
Yeah, like stupid Lamanites. Don't they ever
get some clothes?
Yeah. Ever heard of Alma? So the Lamanites now get all frightened and they take off. In verse 40, it talks about that the men of Lehi pursue them and they track them and they flee then towards Manti. And then in verse 44, and they were inspired by so this is, I might just read 43 actually. Now in this case, the Lamanites did fight exceedingly. Yea, never had the Lamanites been known to fight with such exceedingly great strength and courage. No, not even from the beginning. And this is twice now. We'll see it later, where the Lamanites kind of got their backs to a wall and they fight with the most courage they have. And one is after they scalp Zarahemna, don't they?
I think you missed a bit. So they cross the River Sidon, and they meet Moroni and his army.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Then they fight a bit. Then they escape to Manti, where there's another army of Moroni's waiting for him.
And this is where they just try to fight the best they can. So they're almost surrounded. Is that how the picture's painted to you?
That's exactly how I imagine it. Now there's people behind them, on the side of them, and ahead of them. And this is where they've gone, let's just fight with all our might.
And this idea, so in 44, there's some crazy language, but I might just read the first couple of lines. And they were inspired by the Zoramites and the Amalekites, who were the chief captains and leaders, and by Zarahemna, who was their chief captain. So again, these ringleaders are conning the Lamanites to fighting with all their might. It says, yea, and never had the Lamanites been known to fight with such exceedingly great strength and courage. It doesn't say, yea, and the Zoramites and Amalekites and Zarahemna led the Lamanites to fight with courage and led from the front. You get the feeling that Zarahemna's and the Zoramites and the Amalekites are just poking the bear. They're just geeing up the Lamanites as much as they can.
And now they're surrounded. They're just sort of fighting like dogs. Like this wording here, they did fight like dragons.
Mm.
Fight like dragons, and at the end did smite in their fierce anger.
Yeah.
Like, they're surrounded now. Most of them don't really want to be there, like you said.
But now they're fighting for their lives.
They're stuck. Yeah, exactly. So they're fighting just, like, I guess it's more like fight or flight sort of thing that's kicking. We can't flight anymore. That's it. We're stuck.
And
so we've really got to fight.
I'm imagining the Lamanites just going, what on earth? How did we get into this situation? We didn't even want this battle. These people came, G'd us all up, encouraged us to go and fight our old enemy. We said, okay, no worries. We don't really like them anyway. They did our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, Laman and Lemuel, over. Yeah, let's fight them. And now they're just going, what are we doing here? And you've got these people who used to be church members going, yeah, no, it's good. Kill them. Yeah, kill them for us. It's just a wild situation to be a part of. And we see again in verse 45 that the Nephites were there fighting for their homes. They actually had a purpose. They were defending themselves, not going to war. And it says in verse 46, and they were doing that which they felt was their duty, which they owed to their God, for the Lord had said unto them, and also unto their fathers, that inasmuch as ye are not guilty of the first offense, neither the second, ye shall not suffer yourselves to be slain by the hands of your enemies. So they keep fighting, and we read in verse 51, just a small point here, that there was lots more Lamanites, more than double that of the Nephites, and they were fighting on the banks of the river Sidon. And now we get them surrender, don't they? Or they try to stop. Therefore, this is 53. Now, therefore, I've just got so much stuff highlighted in my scriptures. Therefore, when Zarahemnah saw the men of Lehi on the east of the river Sidon and the armies of Moroni on the west of the river Sidon, they were encircled about by the Nephites. They were struck with terror. Now Moroni, when he saw their terror, commanded his men that they should stop shedding their blood. So this is our first intermission in this battle.
Yeah, and it's funny because so Moroni basically says, so we've got you surrounded, and you'll either surrender or, and the wording he says is, make you extinct. I think he says that in verse 7, yeah. That they may become extinct, and then we will see who will have power over this people. Yeah, we will see who will be brought into bondage.
And so Zarahemnah goes, okay, well, you can have our weapons, but we're not going to commit to you that we won't come up to war.
Yeah, he says, well, I can't say that
That's
I'm going to
not a
make
promise.
this oath.
Yeah.
And so Moroni's like, well, I've said what I've said. It's great. Like, he's not backing down. He's not going, okay, fine, just do your best. He's gone, no, I've said what I've said.
Yeah.
And he gives him his weapon back and gone, I've said what I've said. If you want to make an oath, make an oath. If not, you're going to die.
Yeah. And the end of which I do like this bit, the end of Zarahemnah here, he says, otherwise, so, do this. Yep, you can have it. You can keep our weapons of war, but we're not going to commit to you. And if you don't agree, that's okay. Otherwise, we will retain our swords and we will perish or conquer. I could just imagine him walking up, because now he's doing this bit. Zarahemnah's talking to Moroni directly. And he's saying, well, mate, we'll give you our swords, but we're not going to swear an oath. And if you can't agree to that, I'll get my sword back, and we're just going to fight to the death.
Yeah. And Moroni doesn't say, well, I've got your sword now, I'm going to kill you. He gives him his sword back.
Yeah.
And he says, all right, then let's bring it on, basically. It's just it'd be a great movie, this part.
It would be. And in the middle of 10, Moroni returned the sword and the weapons of war which he had received unto Zarahemnah, saying, behold, we will end the conflict. It's like, here you go, you can have it back, but you're going to die.
Yeah.
And I like that. We will. And he's only 25. And he's going up against this huge Lamanite army. And so now Zarahemnah, in a really weird action, gets his head scalped.
Yeah, well, he thought, well, you know what, I'm just going to rush Moroni. Like, this is my only move now. Rush Moroni and hope for the best. But then, another guy from Moroni's army cut his sword. In fact, he cut the sword at the hilt. I mean, that must have been a powerful hit.
Yeah.
Cut the sword at the hip.
So are you imagining Are you imagining that Zarahemna's literally charging towards Moroni? Is that what you're imagining?
I'm imagining they're close to each other, and
Yep.
Moroni's gone, all right, here's your sword, and then he's just sort of lifted it as he's got the sword, lifted it to
Like a
smite
Hollywood
Moroni.
movie. Moroni
Yeah.
gives him the sword and he turns around to walk away, and then he's like, oh, I'll get him. And then
And
he
then-
spins around and runs
And
at
then
him.
it goes in slow-mo. Yeah. Goes in slow-mo, it goes, and then some guy sees it and runs and cuts the sword at the hilt.
No.
And then as he does it in one foul sweep, he scalps
Yeah.
Zarahemna's head, which is extreme because that's not even the end. It doesn't just scalp him. He then scalps him, picks up the scalped part of his head by the hair, puts it on the end of his sword and holds it up in the air.
Right.
And then verse 14, even as this scalp has fallen to the earth, which is the scalp of your chief, so shall ye fall to the earth, except you will deliver up your weapons of war and depart with the covenant of peace. I mean, that's
Yeah. He pre-warns him again.
powerful. Yeah.
Like, and he's almost talking to everyone else now. Like, this is the best your leader can do. You guys need to think about this.
It's just a powerful message, and it works because a lot of the Lamanites, and I'm guessing it's the Lamanites, not the Amalekites and Zoramites,
Yeah.
the Lamanites, a lot of them go, yeah, we will take this oath and we will leave, and a lot of them do.
Yeah, that's what it tells us in 15. And many came forth and threw down their weapons of war at the feet of Moroni and entered into a covenant of peace. And as many as entered into a covenant, they suffered to depart into the wilderness.
This war then commences, and Moroni, he continues on to battle. And Zarahemna now, he's seen that a lot of his men have fallen.
Yeah.
And so he then goes, okay, hold on. I will make this oath now. Like, out of complete fear. So this is basically between verse 18 to 40. There's an all-powerful war. And then Zarahemna says in 19, when he saw that they were about to be destroyed, cried mightily to Moroni, promising that he would covenant and also his people. And then, yeah, they speak to each other about how they're going to end this war and not come and fight against each other. In 20, and it came to pass that Moroni caused that his work of death should cease again among the people. And they took the weapons from the Lamanites. So they took the weapons and they let them go because they made this oath. And back then, an oath it's not like a promise is now. Like, people break promises all the time. Back then, an oath was you stuck to it. And that was completely it. It was very much whatever you say in an oath is something you will stick to no matter what. So that's why the Nephite army let the Zoramite, Amalekite, and Lamanite army go. So then it talks about how there was a great amount of people, so many that the Lamanites just sort of, their dead just washed up into the river Sidon. And the Nephites, there was a lot of them on their side, but not as numerous as the Lamanites. And then that was sort of it. In 24, thus ended the 18th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, and thus ended the record of Alma, which was written upon the plates of Nephi.
Well, we tried to get through 43, 44, 45, 46. We've actually just got through 43 and 44, and we've been talking for long enough. So we're going to end this episode here, I think. And chapter 45 I really like, and 46. So let's not skip them. Let's end the podcast here. I think we got a little bit carried away with going into the wars, the first war.
The first one, yeah.
Thank you for tuning into an episode. If you could hide to Kolob podcast, catch us on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and we will be back in this week's Come Follow Me to cover 45 through to 49 in an episode of part 2. Thank you and see you soon.